passive aggressive at work, how it shows up, and how to address it. Have you ever received an email that says, "As per my last email," and even before you finish reading it, you already feel the tension? Or maybe someone says in a meeting, "Oh no, it's fine, I'll just do it myself," but somehow you know it's not fine. Today we're talking about something that quietly damages teams and relationships at work: passive aggression. Unlike open conflict, passive aggression is hidden. It's conflict that doesn't speak directly. It whispers, delays, and resists quietly. And the problem with that is simple. At least with open disagreement, you know where you stand. With passive aggression, you're left guessing, and trust slowly starts to erode. So let's talk about how it shows up, why people use it, and most importantly, how we can address it in healthier ways. So what does passive aggression look like in the workplace? Over my 2 decades in the human resources field, I've experienced and observed various forms of passive aggression in the workplace. In my experience, it most commonly manifests in 3 main ways: communication, task-related behavior, and workplace relationships. First, let's start with communication. This is where you see 1. Sarcasm in meetings, which is often disguised as humor on the surface, but carrying underlying criticism or skepticism. For instance, comments such as, "You're early for the meeting today. Did your wife kick you out of the house?" fall into this category of covert insults disguised as humor. 2. People making backhanded compliments or compliments on the surface with condescending or critical undertones. For example, I recall after completing my doctorate, a colleague congratulated me but followed with a remark suggesting that the degree wasn't really necessary, which felt more dismissive than supportive. 3. Individuals copying people on emails instead of speaking directly. There was one time when I worked with a peer who copied multiple colleagues, including supervisors, when they identified an error in someone else's work. It appeared to be an attempt to highlight others' mistakes, either to shame them or to elevate their own performance, which ultimately strained working relationships. 4. Deliberate silence instead of a response. A typical example is when a peer contributes an idea and the team remains silent while the manager moves on to the next point or asks other ideas without acknowledging the contribution or only offering superficial acknowledgement. 5. I've also seen people roll their eyes in meetings when peers contribute their ideas. In other words, nothing is said openly, but the message is still clear. Then there's what I've often observed as task-based passive aggression. In my experience, this is quite common in organizations. It shows up in different ways. Sometimes it looks like deadlines being forgotten or constantly missed. In other words, it's a form of quiet resistance rather than simple oversight. Other times it shows up as doing only the bare minimum, what some people call quiet resignation. I've worked in situations where this seemed to emerge after employees felt overlooked, for example, in promotion decisions. Task-based passive aggression can also manifest through delayed decisions or slow responses, particularly when there is a disagreement with leadership direction, which ends up affecting delivery and momentum. And in some cases, it looks like very literal compliance with instructions, following rules so rigidly to prove a point that a process will fail. In a nutshell, task-based passive aggression is another form of resistance without actually saying no. And finally, there's relationship-based passive aggression. This includes situations where people withhold information from people they see as competition in ways that can disrupt or slow down processes. Relationship-based passive aggression also shows up through excluding colleagues from conversations that they should reasonably be part of. In some cases, you see quiet alliances forming, informal groups that subtly resist or challenge certain decisions or processes. And then there's the classic pattern of smiling in public while criticizing in private, where the outward interaction appears positive, but the private narrative is quite different. In other words, this form of passive aggression plays out through relationships, trust, and social dynamics in the workplace. In many workplaces, especially where hierarchy is strong or culture discourages open disagreement, people don't feel safe to speak up, so frustration finds other ways to come out. So why do people become passive aggressive? On one level, it is a learned response to an existing workplace culture. This occurs in situations where passive aggression has become normalized response in the workplace. If employees see these behaviors being used without consequences, they may start to adopt them themselves. Over time, the culture begins to normalize indirect resistance. For example, I once worked in a place where senior staff used sarcasm, exclusion, or subtle dismissive behavior, which also caused junior staff to begin to mirror those actions because it was simply how things were done there. But here is the part we often miss. Most people are not trying to be difficult. By saying this, I don't mean that the behavior is harmless or acceptable. The point I'm making is that it is often overlooked that this behavior is largely a byproduct of workplace culture. Passive aggression is often caused by fear of conflict, desire to gain control, frustration, unmet needs, resentment, and sometimes feeling powerless. First, there's fear of consequences. People think, if I speak up, I'll be labeled difficult, not a team player. If I challenge this, it might affect my job. Some might think, my manager doesn't really listen anyway. So instead of confronting the issue, they protect themselves by avoiding direct conflict. Second, there are power imbalances. This is when people feel unheard, excluded from decisions, or constantly overruled. Passive behavior becomes a quiet form of protest. And third, there is conflict style and upbringing. Some people were taught, don't argue, don't show anger, keep the peace at all costs. So when they are upset, it leaks out sideways instead of coming out clearly. And this is important to remember. Unexpressed emotions don't disappear, they just change form. Why is passive aggression so damaging? Why does this even matter so much in organizations? First, passive aggression destroys psychological safety. People stop asking questions, they stop sharing ideas, they also stop giving honest feedback because they are not sure how others will react. Second, it creates conflict loops. One person delays, another gets frustrated and becomes defensive, tensions increases, but no one addresses the real issue. So the same problems repeat, just with more resentment each time. And third, it confuses performance management. Managers end up dealing with missed deadlines, low engagement, attitude issues, but the real problem isn't performance. It's unresolved conflict and poor communication. And when that goes unaddressed, small issues slowly turn into major organizational problems. So how can we address passive aggression? Let's get into what actually helps. Step 1. Name the behavior, not the attitude. Instead of saying, you're being difficult, try saying, I've noticed the report was submitted late after we agreed on Friday. Can we talk about what happened? Focus on what you observe, not what you assume. Step 2, create psychological permission to be honest. Ask questions like, is there something about this task that isn't working for you? Do you have concerns about this approach? By doing so, you are signaling that disagreement is allowed. Step 3, address patterns, not just incidents. If this keeps happening, say, I've noticed that the deadlines tend to slip after we have had different views on project. I want us to find a better way to talk about concerns earlier. Now, you are solving the system, not blaming the person. Step 4, and this is for leaders especially. Look in the mirror and ask yourself, do people feel safe disagreeing with me? Do I shut down ideas without realizing it? Do I reward honesty or do I reward silence? Sometimes passive aggression is a response to a leadership style, not employee attitude. And finally, step 5, check yourself. If you notice that you are avoiding difficult conversations, you're complaining to others instead of addressing the problem, you're constantly delaying instead of saying no, that may be your own discomfort with conflict showing up. Direct conversations are uncomfortable, but they are far less damaging than silent resentment. Here's what I want to leave you with today. Most people at work are not trying to be passive aggressive. They are trying to protect themselves in environments where honesty feels risky. And at the same time, we all have a responsibility to communicate in ways that build trust, not erode it. Healthy workplaces don't grow from silence. They grow from respectful disagreement, open dialogue, and the courage to have uncomfortable conversations. So next time you notice sarcasm, silence, delays, pause and ask yourself, what conversation is not being had right now? Because when we learn to address conflict early and directly, we don't just improve performance. We improve in relationships, trust, and workplace culture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.